You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
Hey Jeepers, welcome to show 141 of On the Trail with Kevin and Scott. And yes, we're back on the trail and off the beach.
Yes.
I'm Kevin, the engineer, you know, as I've always told you guys. But if you're one of the new listeners, and we'll get to you in a little bit, I'm the engineer, the guy who reads instructions, uses the right tools, and most of the time follows those instructions.
And I am Scott. I'm the slapstick parts guy, currently on hiatus and has sand where you don't want to have sand. And while I do not use a torque wrench unless under extreme adult supervision with Kevin, I usually mostly zip ties, I will always do what I can to make everyone laugh. And while we will share what worked for us as well as what didn't. Yeah, that too. Remember, it's always up to you what to do, what you want to your Jeep. So make sure you do the research, read the instructions.
And please follow them.
Did I get that almost right?
Almost right.
Man, 141 episodes. I think I get it right.
Well, folks, this is the Post Jeep Beach podcast. And we survived, only slightly sunburned.
Yes.
And had a great time hiking around both the beaches and the event center at the center of the Daytona Speedway.
Yep.
It's kind of interesting to talk to people when, the race cars are still running around. So, and so what model is your...
Okay, okay, we'll do this in a second.
So, but yes, it was great fun. It was fantastic to meet so many listeners there. Hope you all like the little swag bags that we had.
Yep.
As well as we will mention our, hopefully now listening, our new listeners checking us out.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to the podcast. So it was a enormous turnout. There's just no two ways.
Set records for the most Jeeps in one area or something like that.
Yeah, it was phenomenal. You get there an hour early and there's already a line to get in.
Yeah.
Scott posted some wonderful pictures of me.
Hey, that was a good picture.
Standing up on the...
Yeah, but you had the flag, your castle flag going on. I thought that was a rather flattering picture. The other one I took wasn't very flattering. I didn't post that one.
Gotcha. Thank you.
But for $400, I'm joking. No, I'm not.
You'll never know with this one. You will never know with this one. But we had a wonderful time, and again, special thanks go out to Gulf Coast Drive Shafts.
Shane and Mel.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Shane and Mel.
Shane and Mel, especially Drive Shafts.
Corey and William, I think it was. At Metal Cloak?
At Metal Cloak, yeah, that's right. Corey and William were there. I was trying to remember his name. William, welcome to their team.
Right.
I hope you're William. He's a new guy, new sales guy who's rapidly getting used to the whole thing. And Corey is the great guy along with...
I forget her name, and I do apologize. I know I'm supposed to remember it. I really apologize. But
they run the trailer, the Flex trailer, and they were wonderful to let us host in their booth for a little while, and then on down to Raceline with Stacy and Greg. That was a lot of fun to see everybody. That was over by the entrance, so we got to see everybody coming in and those going out with their spoils of war. Yeah. Finding out how to drag things out. And then lastly, with Sherry Tillman Smith and...
the Ally booth.
Yeah, I know the Ally booth, her husband's name.
I think it's Clint.
Clint, that's right. It is Clint. Clint, I'm sorry. By then, the sun had baked the head pretty dang bad.
Yeah. And a special shout out to Harmony, who there was a Jeep there in the Raceline booth that had her name on it.
Yes.
It was about
mental illness and all the struggles and mental awareness. And it was really fun. And then, of course, I got to give a special shout out to Nina Fox.
Yes.
And Nina has an Instagram page, and I believe she's had a Facebook page as well. And Nina has a Gladiator, and what's stunning about that is the graphic work on it. It's
subtle but eye-catching.
It is. It's black with a blue and purple stripe set with a fox back on the back fender. The graphic is just absolutely stunning. It catches your eye. Everybody who sees it, it's just you stop and you go, I got to take a picture of this. And of course, my dear wife goes, ooh, and next thing I know, she's over having a heart-to-heart with Nina about her. And now I have this. We need a graphics on Slightly Altered. We have graphics on. Silver is not a color. Yes. And so who knows what will come of that.
Hey, that's okay. I've lost the LJ. It's now broke.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it's going to be, we're working on something, but someone caught the Jeep fever and they would like to play around and do something. And I said, you know what? Why not? Let's have a little fun with this.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
And a big thank you to Mark over at Wrangler Fix. He came by and said, hi.
Mark, yes. Mark came out and we had a good long chat. Actually had a little bit of a dinner one evening with him. As you may have seen on our posts, we went out and we're just walking back and we're like, that's Mark's new LJ. And he has more of a Ruby.
Ruby Hara.
Yeah, I know. He has the Ruby Hara, which means it's a little more of the unicorn than even yours.
Yes.
Because he has the 6-speed. He does have the Rubicon, but he also has the Sahara package on top of it. And it's not red.
No. Yeah.
And he is slowly planning what he's going to do as far as how he wants his build to go, to utilize his products as well as some of his other things that he likes.
Yep.
We chatted at length. I'm still working with him on a little idea that he wants me to test, and unfortunately, I'm moving houses here during this time frame.
And the Kevin Skuntwork project.
And most of my most of my shop is in boxes, and I borrowed some equipment to try and do some testing, and didn't do what I needed it to do. So I've got to go out and find myself a better see if I can get myself a scanner programmer that I can do some cam crank synchronization testing.
Yes.
And we will share it with you once we get through it, but it's pretty exciting to me, and I think it's going to be a pretty neat idea for anybody else with the 4-liters.
It's a whip at the moment, a work in progress.
Yep.
And that's one of the very interesting things when we talk about work in progress stuff, like Kevin's house right now.
Life tends to intercede.
My house right now.
Yes.
So if you do send us a message, a slight apology. It may take us a couple of days to get to you because both of us are a little busy.
Yep.
But
and that'll be a subject of the garage segment a little later too, as well.
Yep. One of the other things I want to bring up is that outpouring of support because first day into Jeep Beach, unfortunately, I lost my mom. So for listeners that came out and saw me, I was a little distracted at the moment, but the show must go on. So thank you.
He was a little off character.
Yeah. But a big thank you for all the support. I really appreciate it. But other than that, though, I did have a really good time. The friend I was with made a comment about how Jeep people are really nice and really friendly, and it's so much different than other events they host out in Daytona. Lots of ducking.
Yes.
We had 2 teenage kids give us a run by ducking, and one little boy actually threw a duck in the wagon we had with all the stuff, which was really fun.
Yeah.
And again, some of the gift bags had little ducks in them. I wanted to do them because it was kind of fun,
Yeah.
It depends on how you feel, but you know what? Most people had a smile on their face. Run with it,
Yeah, if you're not using it for any serious judgment, if you're just having fun, then by all means.
And the event was really, really cool this year. Like I did talk to one of the engine reps in the Jeep booth while Kevin was at the Ally booth. And it turns out when I talked about the listener who had the e-torque engine, the 3.6 liter, and that giant monstrosity of an alternator on there, I actually was correct. It's a fluid cooled alternator / generator that applies, basically it helps keep the engine moving forward using it's like a mild hybrid system.
Yeah.
So I was kind of on the right track. Again, it's all super secret squirrel technology. I don't know how it works, but it was kind of cool though to actually sit there and talk. I think I was like, yeah, you're pretty much right on base with how it works. I'm like,
Oh, that's cool.
I got something right.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun with the Ally Bank people. We weren't really scheduled to go there, but we had an opening. And I do want to give an apologetic shout out to Racing Optics, who we were supposed to go find.
Yes.
I couldn't find you. So it was not trying to be mean or forgetting you. We still gave your information and shout outs out in the bags, but I don't know where your booth was. I went where I thought it said it was, and I didn't see it, and neither did Scott. So apologies. But with that, since we knew the Smiths at Ally Bank, I did not realize that Ally Bank was in the middle of the Jeep so we ended up in the middle of the actual Jeep sales area with the sand sculpture for the closeout. So that's very fitting and very much appreciated.
Yeah. Also, too, a big thing to Don Cox. We swung by his booth for a little bit, but unfortunately, that was the end of the day. Excuse me, and we were a little sunburnt. So, but we're gonna have
Understatement.
he's of course a show alumni, so we're gonna have him on here in a little bit, probably in the next few shows, and talk about the Tread Lightly stuff.
So, again, if you get the opportunity next year, Jeep Beach 23.
They already announced the dates already.
They already have put the dates up. It's don't come here for the wheeling.
No.
And I'm not saying there isn't any. There is some. Some of the local clubs will take you out, but you're gonna, if you're not from here, you're gonna be like, I'm just driving through the palmettos, scratching, the outside of the vehicle, or getting into a created mud bog and getting stuck, which both happened. And that was probably the only, I don't even want to call it a negative, but some people were a little underwhelmed, is the feedback. Other people had a blast in it, and, all I can do is tell you, hey, the clubs did a bang up job with what they had.
Yeah.
They can't change Florida into, midline Tennessee or Utah.
Yeah. But they
They did a great thing with what they had. So it was a lot of fun. But the rest of it, it's just about Jeep to Jeep camaraderie.
It's a social.
It's a social event, a chance to go out and see literally, I forget what the total vendor count
I have
was.
no idea, but it was big.
It was
It
huge.
took us 2 days pretty much.
Yeah, 2 days to cover everything. And don't forget that some of them did special events on the beach where you could see vendors yet again in different things. And then events they had the tug of wars and all the different challenges.
Yeah, I'm glad you said tug of war. Leroy Vanek, please heal better. He actually took a spill and hurt his knee pretty bad.
Oh.
So be careful, buddy.
Leroy, I've heard of giving your all for a Jeep event, but it usually isn't for tug of war on the beach.
His knee has like 2 heads. It's like one of those monsters, I mean, like no joke. It was the size of a softball.
Oh.
Yeah, so he's healing nicely though.
Okay. But and then, of course, there's always constant stream of Jeeps running up and down the beach because it is a drive-on beach.
Yep.
Although some of the hotels have taken over certain stretches, so now you have to get off to go around the hotel to get back on again. But again, it's just part of the environment. You can't go anywhere without seeing a Jeeper. There's Jeep of every size, shape, and form. If you're a new Jeeper or you have a new Jeep and you want to decide what would be good ideas to build it, all you have to do is walk through the parking lot of that thing, and you will see every imaginable build out there.
Whether it be rubber band tires with speakers all galore,
Bluetooth drive shafts,
the weekend warriors or the hardcore wheelers, the ones that didn't even wash their Jeep when they got there.
That just showed up with the Georgia or Utah mud and rocks still hanging off their Jeep.
One wedged in the bumper.
Yeah, there
bumper
was.
ornament.
Obviously Gladiators were there in Storm, but the interesting thing was YJs. YJs were the old Jeep if you had a YJ, it was probably asked to be put in a booth by somebody. There was just all kinds of those
YJ love
going on out there. So that was pretty cool.
The fun thing too is seeing all the Broncos. Because it was kind of interesting because, even on the beach, there are some videos of Broncos getting stuck. So much for IFS, guys. But the point is that it was kind of cool. There wasn't any, turf warfare. Everything was kind of good. And we're like, hey, guys, you have your Bronco beach. We have our Jeep beach. Go away.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, they're putting toy Broncos on Broncos now. But moving on.
That's fine. Let them do that. I mean,
that's cool.
We've got friends that are have been collecting Matchbox Jeeps for 5-6 years, and I know that our friend Mark over there at Jeep Lab has a wall, and he's got them pegged up so they're multi-deep. So if you're into that, collecting the Matchbox Jeep models, and you're interested in some, you can always reach out to Mark at Jeep Lab. And have you got this year? What are the color? And if he's got one, he might trade with you. And he doesn't sell them.
No.
But he does trade occasionally.
He doesn't ship. You got to go see him. You got to walk into his shop.
Yes, which is a treat unto itself.
Exactly.
And then let's see. Oh, another shout out to Ron and Tommy at Red Scorpion. They just moved their shop and expanded again.
Nice.
He's now a little ways down, closer to Tampa, back in an industrial district off of Orient Road, which means not much to everybody listening outside of the Tampa area. But he did grow significantly. He's back to 3 lifts. He's got a fab area. They just opened this past Monday in the new location. And he's already hard at it. When I walked in there the other day, they already had 3 Jeeps in there, 2 up on lifts and 1 on the ground, and about 5 or 6 outside. So congrats, Ron. I hope the new shop helps a little bit. Still needs an air conditioner, but then again, every shop in Florida needs an air conditioner. So
When you talk about Jeeps being on the lift, it was the hardest thing to look Corey at Metal Cloak in the eye, and no, sir, it's still not installed.
yeah, yep.
Hey, good news is that we did get the bed rug in.
You
I don't know if
were
we talked
just lucky Will wasn't there this year.
Yeah, I would have got a stern talking to, but no.
He'd have probably made you drag it over there and put it on the table, and they would have done the lift right there in the middle of Jeep Beach.
Dude, I've been at some auto sound challenge things, and Spring
Yeah.
Break National is what it was, and they had like audio install parties. I had 2 different cars there,
Yeah.
in competitions. I'm like, great, my Jeep's gonna be one of those things.
Yeah, well, yeah, it might get done that way.
Yes. Ow. That hurt.
Well, you kept,
But the
you
truth
kept
hurts.
telling me I'm going to get it done for Jeep Beach.
Yeah. Yeah, the Gladiator was awfully comfortable at Jeep Beach.
Yeah, of course you didn't say what year.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, you see, my man, pound it. Boom, that just happened. Thank you. Yes. I like someone else we know. Moving on. Oh, I feel bad. I should not have said that.
So anyhow,
Oh God, I feel real bad.
it was fun though because we got some new friends that went along for the first time. Derek and his wife. I'm sorry, I'm pulling a name blank here. From Line X of South Tampa Bay.
Oh yes. In our defense, guys, we have a lot going on behind the scenes.
But anyway, it was their first time to come down and just sample it because they're getting heavily into the Jeeps and the custom spray mods and the things. Yeah.
And Bob from the LS Swap YJ was there too.
Bob was
His
there,
first-
and he had a lot of fun at that time too, getting a chance to walk through, and he ran into all kinds of the vendors that his parts came from, and so that was cool because he got a chance to give face-to-face feedback to BDS suspension to a lot of those kinds of people, as well as see what other parts are available there.
And a big thank you and a big welcome too to also Novak because of that video we put.
Oh, yes.
If you have not seen that video, please check it out, Kevin.
On YouTube.
I will say, the man did a great job editing that video, and the guys over at Novak liked the video, and they're actually following the show now. So welcome to the Novak people also.
Yeah. And if you haven't seen the video, check it out. I'll tell you, it's a 2-part YouTube video. It's under On the Trail with Kevin and Scott, LSNAYJ. There are a bunch that use that name, same kind of a moniker name, but we're down there. You'll see us. And the interesting thing is what you'll see is the thumbnail right now is 3 guys sitting in lawn chairs in front of a Jeep.
Yep.
It is not, I will repeat, it is not a how-to build. What it is, though, is something I don't think you'll find too much in this world. It's one man's journey from buying the Jeep, okay, and doing kind of feeling it out, deciding what he wanted to do, why did he do it, and then why did he make these choices. And then there is plenty of build information through it to the end of it where we give you a final look, and it's a rolling Jeep, and it's, we end with showing it on the trail.
Yeah.
And so the first half is a little bit of the backstory. It's kind of a good thing if you're in that realm of, I want a Jeep or I have a Jeep. What should I do with my Jeep? This isn't to tell you what to do with your Jeep, but this is the thought processes that somebody went through and the timeline. And something a little different is, this is how Bob started out with a rusty 4-cylinder, 4-speed 95 YJ.
Right.
And how he ended up with one seriously bad beep.
Thank you for self-beeping yourself. Well, it's
YJ
it's
custom.
It's a video of how he bench built.
Yeah.
And it's that process. Kevin and I talk about bench building all the time. Like, it's okay because it's cheaper to have an eraser on a piece of paper than it is to go, you know what? I spent all that money on that suspension. I don't like it.
And it's also a realistic discussion over expenses. No, we don't break it down by the dollars and cents, but we talk about the additive costs and the fact that from pulling the 4-cylinder to turning the key on an LS, it was only 4 days.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, it wasn't done. It didn't drive out of there that day, but it was a running, power plant in 4 days. And that's pretty amazing unto itself. And then started with all the custom little sneaky things he wanted to do.
Yeah, the Anita and Murphy's.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, you can check that one out when you get a chance. And again, welcome to those listening from Novak. We had a lot of fun with your product.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the things like Kevin and I really want to stay true to is the fact that a lot of the stuff we bought our own parts. You know?
Yeah. Either the guys I'm helping buy their own parts, we buy our own parts. We're not a sponsored show.
Yeah.
Yes, we have patrons. So if you, and some of them are commercial, but there's a difference between a sponsor and a Patreon. So we stick to that rule right now, and I think for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, that's pretty much our business model at the moment.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
But other than that, though, anything you want to touch on before we tire into the garage? Because I know people are like, man, you teased it earlier. What do you guys got to talk about?
Questions you guys sent me.
Oh, yeah, that's right. This is another email show, guys.
Yeah.
So if you do have a question, email the show at onthetrailpodcast@gmail.com, and we will get back to you as soon as we're able to.
Yeah.
You can also use the Facebook Messenger or anything else like that. Okay to tip your tire into the garage here after our commercial announcement that we don't have commercials?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll be right back. Hey Jeepers, it's Scott here. As always, to remind you to check out the 4x4 Radio Network and also our Patreon page. And please check out the YouTube page. That way you can see the cool video like we just talked about. On that note, though, I will say thank you again for everything and all the support. And please share these with your friends. And we're going to tip your tire into the garage right now and see what Kevin's going to answer on an email. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, okay, folks. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the wonderful process of podcasting
Hold on, I'll get the mailbag out.
to to answer some
wow.
listener emails.
Never mind, that's not the mail I was looking at. Something else.
Yeah, it looks like an old bill. And this one starts with a little bit of a discussion from George S. George has been a long-time listener, and we've had several conversations, but this time he pops off. He's got an LS, and I don't know if it's in his Jeep or another vehicle.
Right.
But he had sent some pictures, and what he had was an issue on the this LS package that was a cylinder 8 misfire at high throttle. It was only diagnosed by the check engine light. In other words, he didn't feel anything. A stethoscope. He could hear the lifter was audible, so kudos to that, George. That you know how to use the either the old screwdriver trick or a stethoscope, a mechanic stethoscope. Found out that he had a flattened lifter, which just simply means, for those non-technical, that the cam and the lifter that opened the valve had worn incorrectly, and that can cause bad valve timing or incorrect valve opening. He replaced everything on the passenger bank. Noted that he broke a bolt in the intake and had the classic
Yes.
metric versus US. He said, one was in inch pounds and something was set in foot pounds, and the two of them, I really got metric US, and you ended up setting your torque wrench a little high, I gather, and broke a bolt, but he got it out.
I thought you were going to say the other thing.
Oh.
Every Jeep job is a broken bolt away from a 3-day ordeal.
Oh, yeah. One broken bolt away from 3-day ordeal. He was able to reinstall the intake, and it looked okay, put the new head gasket on, and lapped all the valves. All right.
Okay.
And he says, great. And now it idles reliably rough. Interesting descriptor there. Once warmed up. And idling long enough will trigger a P300 and a P306. Hit or miss, pun intended. He says, runs at high speed without any issues, only sets the check engine light when idling under load. He replaced plug wires, coil packs on number 6, and spark plugs. He checked fuel pressure via, he calls it the redneck method he came up with. He unplugged all the injectors, pumped up the systems, unplugged the FPR, plugged in each passenger injector one at a time, and cranked the engine, and observed even 1 PSI drops per cylinder per crank, and drop each one 5 PSI or so in 5 consecutive cranks. So he's saying he has even fuel flow.
Yeah.
He says, I'm completely out of ideas. Help.
Here he comes to save the day.
No, don't even go there.
I'm joking.
He edited to add he was chasing audible ticking sounds that sounded like spark escaping, and cylinder 5 went away with jiggling of the wires, leading to a wire change. 6 goes away when the coil is unplugged, whether using number 4 as a swap or a brand new one. Seems to jive with the rhythm of the misfire, the ticking, he's saying.
Okay.
So what can you look at? I said, yeah, well, diagnosing on a paragraph. So it's out of a 4-wheel drive GMC 1500 pickup was the data he gave me. It's in closed loop mode. He sent me some screenshots. Engine load at idle, coolant temperature 178, short-term fuel trim does look good. A little confusing because the long-term and the short-term, one is negative, one's positive, but that just could be when you ran it. So you have random multiple cylinder misfire detected as a 300. And let's see, what was 306? I don't see a printout of 306. So anyway, George, first thing to do is I'm going to go back to basics rather than electronics. Low-speed misfires are usually not fuel because you say it runs well at high RPM. Fuel demand is less at low RPM, not at the other end.
Right.
Spark, similar. Now, you can hide some spark because as you get up your RPM, the misfires aren't as obvious, and you do get some compression ignition because of the heating of the cylinders. So your ignition one, but you seem to have rotated things around a little bit to see if that was the issue. The other thing you can do there in the electrical is to, if you have access to either an oscilloscope or some other way to check the actual electrical pulse that is being sent to, or it's actually not a pulse. You're grounding your coils on your injectors. The computer shunts to ground, and that's what opens the injector and then shuts off and allows the coil to go dead, and then the injector closes. And you can check to make sure that you are getting a reliable pulse. And you just, if you have a multi lead system, at least 2 channels or 3 would be better. You can check several of them, and you'll see real quick if you're getting a smooth pulse. Otherwise, you can plug in a Noid light. Problem with Noid lights is once you get up above a certain RPM, the blink becomes almost a steady light. But at idle, they will show you if you've got that steady rhythmic blink, 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 blink. If it goes blink, 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 then you know that you have an issue either with the PCM or a wire issue between the two. Let's see, what else can we look at? Coil-wise, you've rotated. I'm sorry, not when I say coil, I'm referring to the coils around the injectors. My brain, I go into engineer mode. So your injectors, since you've rotated them around, I think I was reading in there, you remove the ignition coils around. So you could just try moving your injectors from one to the other and see if 6 moves to 5, 5 moves to 6, the problem, and then you'd know if you have an errant sticky injector.
Or maybe one's fire hosing. Yeah,
well, that could be, but that usually... Well, I guess it could be fire hosing, but the thing is, you'll know if you have a problem if you're going that way by moving your injectors around a couple of times, and it's probably the least invasive because I'm going to get a little more invasive as we go along.
Just quick question.
Yep.
Now, because devil's advocate, multiple cylinder misfire.
Yeah.
Now, is there a way to differentiate if it's on one bank or if it's on like?
No, usually it'll tell you. Okay. Now, GMs typically will give you a code that will be multiple cylinder misfire bank 1. The fact that it's giving it general, it could be moving around.
Okay.
I would start checking things with these random misfire codes. Is if it's not pegging it down, let's see. Let's start out with the obvious. All right. Number one, is the actual knock sensor that's picking up these that are in the valley in good shape? Or do you have a broken wire?
Or a melted wire.
Or a melted wire shorting out? I was doing some research, and it's like you can only have 3 states of error in an electrical circuit. If you take the computer out of it and the device, you can have an open wire, you can have a grounded wire, or you can have shorted to power. Those are the only 3 errors you have.
Right.
Okay. If you don't have those 3, you have a good wire. So you can take a look at your knock sensors. And normally what I would do is I would look at your knock sensors, because really all they are is piezoelectric microphones, and that's also how the engine is determining. The only difference between a knock and a engine fire, a proper fire to the computer, is the time of it.
Right.
You could have an issue with your crank signal. I'm just going through possible causes of a misfire situation. Is your crank sensor, off? Is your cam sensor off? Is your cam crank angle off? You have to have a scan tool to check that. Okay. That will cause these kinds of issues. Now, I know this came up after you pulled the head off to work on the other problem with the lifter on cylinder 6, but could you have possibly knocked a wire loose on that valley pan on those knock sensors? Could it be crimped under something? Those are things that can be checked. If your crank, this is one that I have seen not once, but 4 times on engines, and that is the crank position sensor was fine, but the reluctor wheel that's attached to where your crank actually cranks got water and sat there and rusted. And some of the actual little tabs that go past had rusted and were giving erratic information. There wasn't the metal mass, and it wasn't giving a clean signal.
Okay.
Because the one thing I did learn about the GMs is they are based to run off square waves. They do not like any other shapes, sine waves, triangular waves, shark tooth waves. GM might work on a sine wave if amplitude's tall enough, but it won't work on a shark wave no matter what you do. And my hat's off to the guys at Dakota Digital, who worked with me on that to figure out adaptation of some of the GM products to the some of the Chrysler products to the GM. So I'm thinking as we're having a discussion here to get your answer, because this was the only time I could get to figure it out.
Yeah.
So I'd make sure, if you have the ability, to check your ignition circuit and make sure that the data coming in and coming out is even. And that's going to require some pretty in-depth equipment. Like I said, a multi-lead oscilloscope, putting them on the coil leads, checking the coil. They also fire by grounding. Check the injectors. Make sure they're all pulsing equally. If they're pulsing equally across the board, now we're going to get kind of nasty, is you had a problem with a flat lifter.
Right.
Is it possible that your cam is gone and you put all new lifters in, and if your hardening on the cam itself was shot, you put new lifters in, and you now have your valve train timing is just completely
all over the place,
which would give you random misfires at low RPM, because at higher RPM, the timing is just as critical, but you have compression heating to help your ignition. You're not relying 100% on the spark plugs. You could have lack of valve opening, because if your cam lobes are worn, your lifters are sitting deeper in the bore, and you're not opening the valves as wide as they would be. So there's another possibility there. That one's a little easier to check, as weird as it sounds. You can take off the valve cover with the engine cold, put a dial micrometer, and read the lift, okay, and actually compare. And if you have a very uniform lift, and the specs on your engine, I don't know them off the top of my head, but you can find out what the valve lift should be, and you just put the dial indicator with its probe right on the tip of the rocker where the push rod comes up, and you're going to read the cam lift. And you can see if you've got, let's say you've got 0.50, 0.50, 0.50, 0.45, 0.50, you just found a
bad spot.
Spot on the cam. And yeah, it's a pain in the tuchus to change that,
The one thing I don't know, that I don't know what year this motor is, but in my experience in the parts realm, because a lot of us parts guys talk, is a lot of the newer General Motors engines went to the 0W20 Dexos oil. And one of the problems, Kevin would probably know better about this than I would, because I'm going to absolutely butcher this explanation. But the PSI in 0W20 oil, even though it flows and does the same rate as like the 5W30s, but the PSI strength or film strength isn't as good on the 020s as it is like on, say, a 5W20. So that can also help to premature camshaft wear, because some of the Cadillac 6.4s, I think, please don't hold me to that, but the 6-liter Cadillac Escalade motors were having problems with them wiping out the camshafts and crankshafts because the PSI film strength on the oil wasn't up to what.
Well, it's actually not. It's a little different. You're close. It's the shear strength of the oil, which is equivalent to you squeegeeing it off. The older, thicker oils had a thicker film, which I'm not even sure that the shear strength of the oil actually, because that's technically the oil being destroyed by the shearing motion of the moving components. But obviously a 020, it gets in better into tighter places, but it doesn't provide as much cushion.
Right.
Okay, between the parts. And if your parts aren't mirror smooth with the 020, you will see significant wear because there's not as much oil between the two, even though the lubricity of the thinner film can be greater. The main reason most manufacturers went to 020 in smaller engines was that it has superior lubricity in tight spaces. So they could make very precise machined engines with small turbochargers developing all kinds of horsepower. But of course, the thicker oils just wouldn't flow into those small crevices and lubricate like the turbo bearings and those kind of things as well. That's why, like my daughter's Honda has the 020s, and the warning system gives her like 1 day. Change it now. And not quite. Don't get me wrong. I'm not picking on Honda. It's been a great little car, but yeah, it demands it to be changed. And when it comes out, it's clear it's doing its job, because it reminds me more of a diesel oil coming out, because it's picking up all the soot out of the turbo bearings and keeping them clean, so that they do continue to spin freely.
They don't coke up.
So, but anyway, on to George. You're into that. Be very, very quiet. I'm hunting a miss. And I realize that's not the answer you want to hear, but you've got to you got to have fuel, air, and fire. Okay, those are the three things. And along with the air, most people forget there's a second half to the air. Is you got to have an exhaust. And we did discover that, as we mentioned on a show or two ago, about the red TJ that was breaking up at high RPMs, and that was a plugged exhaust. I don't think yours is a plugged exhaust because you're breaking up on low RPM. But you do need to validate that you do have fuel pressure. And it'd be nice. You can usually rent for free, just your credit card temporarily from O'Reilly's. I know here we'll rent you a fuel pressure gauge that you just simply screw onto the Schrader valve on the fuel rail. And it's typically the driver's side fuel rail on the 5.3s. And you can read it, and it should be 58 to 62, I think, on the GM. But check on it. You've got, obviously, the information on your motor. You can Google that, and it'll tell you exactly what it's supposed to be. If you're low, and here's the wild thing, is we had things running with 20 PSI.
Yeah.
It just didn't idle real well. Okay. But also, while it didn't idle real well, it didn't rev real well either, because, the fuel pressure went down to 5 under throttle.
What about like a leak down compression test?
That's what I was going to go to next. Here's the thing. You say you lap the valves, and I appreciate that. That's a great idea, but you realize that lapping the valves also it may adjust the height. Yes, you have hydraulic lifters in that engine. They should be compensating, but we're grasping at straws here. Could it be that you have a valve hanging open or multiple valves hanging open, because of a combination of the lapping? Or is there, I don't know what you did, and I don't like to make these assumptions, but if the lapping compound wasn't cleaned off really, really well, it could have scored the seats in the first few minutes of running, and you could have valves that aren't sealing. So a cylinder leak down test would do a great job towards saying, do I have a compression leak? Because crappy idle is another sign of compression leak, whether it's a compression leak from rings or a compression leak from valves. So that's something, a leak down test kit. You can get a Harbor Freight cheapie, for under $100, or I'm sure you can probably rent one if you know someone who has one. So we're looking at air. So on the air side, that's technically the air side is if the cylinder has excess leakage. I'm hoping you sound like you're doing things competently, so I'm hoping that you're going to find you've got no serious leak down problems. The other thing that people don't realize is leak down is done at top dead center, on that cylinder. You have to have your valve covers off, look at the valves, make sure that you're all the way closed, with them up. And then the hardest thing is figuring out how to brace the engine so that it doesn't turn over when you pump 100 PSI into that cylinder.
Yeah.
Because it will. You'll have it go, boom. Oh, crap, now it's at bottom dead center.
Yeah.
And I've usually found that manuals are a little easier to do that with. Automatics can be a bit of a challenge to get them to balance or to find some way to restrain it from turning. Most of them that I've seen have, if the engine has an inspection plate cover on the transmission, they're little fork units that bolt into one of the cover plate holes that locks onto the starter gear teeth ring that prevent it from turning. So that's another tool that you may or may not have. Ignition-wise, oscilloscope's about the only way I know how to check it at this point. From what you've done all the standard swapping of parts, between points. I don't automatically run to new because, unfortunately, the more of the cheaper aftermarket stuff out there, we've gotten dozens of parts that were just as bad as the old, particularly on things like idle air control motors.
Yeah,
we threw some in one of the TJs in a hurry, so we didn't fret. When somebody said, yeah, we got it, it's $35. Okay, we'll get it. And then less than a month later, it was frozen again, and it was jammed up solid. And it's like, it still didn't even have rust on it.
Yeah.
And put a new idle air in, and it's back to business. We just bought a better one. If you have access to a good scanner, start looking at the what data it's telling you on the misfires from the NOx sensors. That takes an eye to look at it and see if you're getting the pulses off. You can throw an oscilloscope onto those leads as well. But as you can tell here, George, there's no easy answer at this point. You're down in the weeds.
Yeah.
I'd try rotating things from bank 1 to bank 2 to see if it's a lead. It was running before, and you just had a cylinder 6 miss, and now you've got multiple cylinder misses. I'd go back and check my wires. I mean, probably 2 to 1. Most of these mystery misfires are a wire rub through and part-time shorting out.
Other quick question I have is when you seat, because I know we had it on your head on your Jeep.
Yep.
If you don't get that push rod dead center in that.
That ends up with bent push rods in my case and bent rockers.
Could he have a bent push rod or rocker in this scenario?
It wouldn't rev.
Gotcha.
He could, but the likelihood is if you, George and everybody, what Scott's talking to is when we put the Edelbrock head on it, unfortunately, one of the push rods was installed not in the cup of the lifter. It was sitting out on the rim of the lifter. And so the first time we cranked it over, the valve topped out. The push rod actually bent, the rocker arm bent sideways as well as the trunnion that it fits in. And this is on a 4-liter, not on an LS. And generally mayhem, and it ran like crap. Fortunately, the 4.0 is a non-interference engine, so that the valve never got close to striking the piston. So for me, it was mostly, okay, go get another set of trunnion bearings, another saddle bracket, and 2 new rocker arms and a new set of push rods. And number 6 cylinder has all new hardware in it, and put it all back together, make sure it was centered, lit the key off, and she's run fine ever since.
Nice.
But that gave you a consistent problem, and it also came up as a consistent cylinder 6 misfire at all RPMs. So we're looking for a low speed culprit at the moment based on his description, and typically, if it's an injector, to be low speed failure, it most likely is overfueling, like you said, a fire hose. We got a stuck injector that's dribbling. But then again, that would be a single cylinder. We have multiples here.
Yeah.
So multiple cylinder misfires usually means something either in the control circuit or something, as I say, when you have multiples, look for the commonality.
Right.
Okay. I'm going to throw a really curveball one at you, George, is have you checked your engine ground strap?
Yeah.
Okay. If you don't have the ground strap between the head and, continuity to the battery, that could be the problem. Okay. Because the power will seek its own way out. And if it's not a clean path, it could have a lot of noise, and you may not be getting the correct grounding signals or the amount of power that you need. Although, now that I say that, the computer controls by grounding the coil, not powering the coil, both on the ignition and on the thing. But still, take a voltometer, turn it on ohms, single scale if it's not an auto ranger, stab the negative terminal with your black, and stab the, I'm sorry, for continuity, ohms or continuity, but I like ohms, and then stab the head, poke the head, see what it reads. It better be 5 or less, and if it's not, check your grounds, because that will cause erratic sensor behavior. It'll cause ignition issues. It'll cause injector. It could do them all.
It'll wreak havoc.
It typically does wreak havoc.
Well, that's when you talk about commonality. He replaced. Did he replace all the lifters on that side?
Well, I don't know.
Then that's where I was kind of. But so that my first idea of thinking was that, like, this leak down compression test. See what you got going on, because when Dory hydrolocked her JK, it ran fine, didn't have a miss. Mm-hmm.
But believe me, it had a banana shaped connecting rod.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that the check engine light would come on during idle, but if I immediately fired up and then gunned it and just drove it home like I stole it, it did fine till I got slow. It pulled in the driveway and check engine light would come on.
Yeah, and when you think about that, that's because you had uneven compression.
Right. It was down 20 PSI just in that cylinder.
Right. So you could also do a compression check. Again, the thing that was throwing me on that one, I would have normally suggested that right away, but you moved and you said, okay, I only had it on 6, pulled the head off, did the valve job, made all these changes, cleaned up, yada, 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 put it all back together, and now I have random misfire. Right. And that makes me wonder. New lifters on an old cam, it's done all the time, but sometimes this is the side effect of it, is if the hardened layer was worn off that cam and they were on borrowed time where we were running soft cam, the heart of the cam is mild, relatively speaking, and the new lifters are hardened bottoms, it could grind that cam away to nothing in short order.
I can't tell you how many times on what you've said, how many times I've sold new knock sensor wiring harnesses because they melt. They're in the intake, they're in the valley, they get hot,
they get clamped on, they get everything. It's pretty.
It's a harsh environment.
Yeah, but it's also very easy to have those wires get pinched. Even under people like, well, it's plastic manifold. Well, yeah, but the head is aluminum, and if you pinch it between the manifold and the head, you will get
soft copper still going
to get cut. So those are all things I'd look into. Unfortunately, I don't really have a whole lot more to go on. So sorry, it's a little bit hypothetical here, but I figured this was an easier way than trying to type out everything that we just said for the last 20 minutes on an email. Plus, this shares it to everybody else that's chasing these problems. These kind of misfires are the mystery, and you kind of have to play around and just close your eyes and think of the fact that I got air coming in. It's going through a filter. It's going through a throttle body, past a masso flow sensor that's supposed to be reading it, past a intake air temperature bulb that's supposed to be telling me what the temperature is. Even a relatively cheap OBD scan tool that has the ability to read live data can read those. So you can plug it in and look, and if you're sitting here going, okay, like I am right now, it's 89 degrees here in Florida and my intake air temperature is telling me I'm 22 degrees. Yeah, there's probably an issue there. So you can kind of get some barometric pressure. You want to know what your barometric pressure is where you are? Google it. It'll tell you within feet of what you are. You can do a lot of check off the list. Remember, as we've said before, computers are very literal little beasties. They only tell you what they have been told by their sensors. They often don't know if they're being lied to. All they can do is compare multiple results across the sensor band, and then they make a educated guess. You still have to do the digging. So given what you've said, you may have a worn cam that unfortunately putting new parts on may have exacerbated, but the way to find that is a leak down test, a standard compression test followed by a cylinder leak down. And those may point out some problems. If they all come back perfectly normal, okay, you've just cleared your valve job, you just made sure your rings are good, your head gasket's holding, you follow where we're going with this. And then you can start going, okay, if you can get your hands on an oscilloscope, one of the little portable ones, one that plugs in. They're no longer the big tube things that weigh 100 pounds. They're little boxes that either hook up to a laptop or have their own little screen. And you can compare the waveform. We're getting down pretty deep here, but you can plug into multiple units and make sure that you see that very rhythmic standard square wave pattern for both the coil pack and for the fuel injectors. And if you get with any questions, believe it or not, you can go in and Google on known good waveform 5.3 GMLS, and you will actually get images on the internet of known good waveforms for the injector or the coil pack.
Now, you talked about having the Noid light on there at idle, and it'll give you the pulse. And you said watch for the pulses on that Noid light.
Right.
Because we just found this out, could he theoretically do the same thing with the pin on the coils to see if he gets a steady light for that?
You can try, but there's no... Unfortunately, since that's an inductive system, it's not really made for the frequency. Yes, it should show up. And what he's talking about, folks, we talked about in the last show, is we discovered that the home AC power testers, the contactless little pins that you
put a battery
in, and you can go up and see if a wire's live, an outlet's live, a switch is live, and it kind of has a little glowy orange thing and goes brrr, if there's power. We found out you could go see if a coil was firing by holding it. You might have to try different positions to get it within the magnetic field, but lo and behold, with the engine running, you gotta.
It blinked.
Now, if you rev the engine, it went ee. But it's a very coarse check. There's no ability to see timing. Whereas on an oscilloscope, Scott, you can actually see the pulse count, and by their width across time, you can say, "Hey, look, I'm missing every fifth pulse." Well, that's a miss. And if it's I'm missing it on 2, I'm missing it on 4, but now I'm missing it third time, now it's sixth time.
I now know what you're talking about, because when we had the one scan tool, or when I was trying to figure out what's wrong with Dory's Jeep, we plugged it in, and it had a miss counter. It'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Until it got to 25, then boom, check engine light would come on.
Yep.
Stop, reset. I'd floor it, turn it on, and it would hold at 4,000 RPM.
And it wouldn't count at all, would it?
It wouldn't count at all.
Yeah. So
now I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So we're down to the gnat's whiskers at this point. So
that's tiny.
Yeah, it's needle. I wish I had a better answer for you, George, but that's kind of where we are. I'm impressed with what you've done so far, though. It's really awesome. And the fact that you use a stethoscope. I mean, I just used an old long screwdriver, stuck it to my ear, and showed Scott and a few others how to do it. And they were like, "You can actually hear the valves opening." Yes, you can.
Well, that's one of the things too. Like,
just don't slip and hit the spark plug cables.
Please be careful.
That hurts.
Zap. No, and I made the joke about the Mighty Mouse thing, but again, Kevin does have that moniker of being very well what he does. But bear in mind, also, he's got the vehicle there in front of him. All these things he's telling you is what he's done.
I do have one last
Solve
thing you
it.
just popped into my head while we were saying this. And George, this is another one that's relatively easy to look. That's very, very, very common on GMs. And I'm going to ask you, because I don't see that you did it here. Did you replace the gaskets when you put the old manifold back on? If you didn't, you could have a bad seal on your gaskets. Okay, and that's really common on the LS motors with that.
It's really common on all the vehicles because, as you said, that it was always the techs in a hurry that didn't want to replace those 6 O-rings when they did spark plugs and had to remove the plastic intake. That wreaked havoc later down the road.
And that's just what occurred to me as I was sitting here going back
Same
over
thing here.
all the dumb, stupid mistakes I've made in the past.
Oh, believe me, I was the one that sat there and go, "You want the intake manifold gas? Nah, I don't need them." Okay, it turns out they waited till I was at lunch to come back to ask for them.
Well, on the GM style intake runner system, the black plastic ones, it's a very narrow, thin. It's not an O-ring. It's actually a trapezoidal shape that kind of looks like an O-ring, and it's supposed to in quotes, folks, snap in, and I've had trouble with them flopping out, shifting around, having air gaps in there that lead to various air leaks depending upon the revs and the pulse counts. And when you rev the engine, it's not as obvious because the hole, so to speak, in the seal is a constant size. At lower RPM, that constitutes a bigger chunk of unfueled air or unregistered air, whereas at higher RPMs, there's a lot more flow, so it gets less of an effect.
Gets lost in the rush.
Gets lost in the rush. So you may want to dig back in if you didn't. The other thing is, this is a trick that I've heard of from several of the mechanics. Haven't practiced it myself, but after you clean up the heads for where the gaskets go in, and you snap the new gaskets into the cover, they use a very, very light film of oil on the head on both sides to help the gasket seat, and slide smoothly as you torque down. Because as you tighten those bolts down, you're actually sliding the angled faces together from up high down low. The plastic's being pulled down. And if the rubber, can't move as you're drawing it down evenly, it will roll, which will leave you another airspace. So there's another thing that you can check.
Okay. Well, what about the copper spray or gasket shellac?
I have never heard anybody say anything good about that on these O-ring style gaskets, even though I know they're not.
No, I was thinking of the actual head gasket. So.
Oh, the head gasket. I typically follow the gasket manufacturer's requirements. Some say to coat it with a sealant. Others, and they're usually the older vehicles, and they were done because the machining wasn't up to par like they are these days.
Gotcha. So that's so me seeing those old cans, the Indian shellac and all that, that's old school
the old spray it with copper spray paint. Then later on it was aluminum spray paint and set it wet. They're all have a point, but the truth is none of those DIY materials really had the temperature capabilities to stand up to the combustion temperature. What they did was they acted as a temporary lubricant. As you were tightening things down, it let things slide. Gotcha. The newer multi-piece gaskets tell you flat out, use them dry. They've got the slip built into the layers of the gasket. Scott has an idea.
I just had a Snap Fire. I cannot remember where I saw this. It was on... I wish I could name my source, folks, and I'm sorry. There was an article about stretch head bolts, especially on the LS platforms. And people saying, "Oh, I'll just throw them at a washer in there." And it talked about the torque to yield. Once you pass it
will
back.
not come back.
So, question: did you use new head bolts?
Yeah. Did you check? Is that that style of bolt? The torque to yield, as they called, or stretch bolt system. Those of us who actually owned one of the earlier Ford Power Strokes, the 6.0 and the 6.4s, are well aware of the stretch to yield, and will never use them again. I blew both heads off my 5-liter, and they physically did not come off and fly anywhere, but it stretched the bolts, blew the head gaskets out, and killed the engine in the middle of the freeway with horses on the back in a trailer. Yeah. And so, if your engine model and year, George, had the torque to yield bolts and you reuse them, that could be it too, although I don't think it would rev well. I really think that's probably not it, Scott. It's good to look at,
Right.
but typically if your head gasket has failed at low RPM, it's not going to hang around town in high RPM. You'd have all kinds of
Problems. Gotcha.
problems, combustion gases into the coolant, the radiator overflow, just all the horror stories you can think of.
Okay. Just a random thought poked in my head.
No, that's what we said, George. This is really the two of us sitting here scratching our heads trying to figure out what the heck could be going wrong with your LS. So.
Yeah, and when I sent you the message, we're going to talk. Literally, we were here talking.
So, anywho, I hope that helps you, George, somewhat. At least gets you some ideas of where to go. Similarly, for the rest of you guys, kind of an idea of the thought processes to chasing down those mystery problems, whether they be electrical shorts, whether they be random misfires, or even, consistent misfires in one cylinder. Electrically, it's scary to a lot of people, but the truth is, like I said, there's only 4 states: good wire, shorted to ground, shorted to power, or broken.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
That's it.
And you can argue about, well, the sensor bad. That's not the wire. Okay, I get it. The sensors can fail. But, as far as a wire, and you'd be surprised, particularly on Jeeps, how often we get into shorted to ground and broken. Those are probably the 2 most common. And I have seen shorted to power on a certain 91 YJ that was brought in that was pretty much looked like the inside of a barbecue grill.
Yeah. Nice.
But, it's not that common. But shorted to ground is very common. And that's when something just stops working, but seems to be there, because it has a path to ground. Electricity will flow, but you will not get a consistent.
Well, the key to these kind of situations is they take the 2 things that none of us have enough of: time and patience.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that.
But like I said, electricity will flow where it wants to.
Yeah, well, electricity takes the shortest path back to the battery, and short is defined by the resistance, the ground.
Yeah.
And that's why I tell you to put the voltometers on ohms at the lowest basic setting. Yes. And the YJ that we did for Shane and Melissa was a classic example of that. We did the initial check before we did anything. When he was telling me that the headlights don't work right, the engine doesn't run right, I said, okay. What do you think it could be? Well, I have a guess, but we're going to test. Preferably test, don't guess. But you got to start with the hypothesis, which is just a scientific fancy word for a guess.
I guess.
But you come in there, and I put the probe on the negative terminal of the battery, and then turn it auto ranging at just ohms, and I start touching things that I know electricity flows through because I see a ground screw in it from a device.
Yeah.
And when you see numbers that are 20 ohms, 150 ohms, and infinite ohms, you realize that we do not have a clean ground circuit here.
That's why when you open up the Jeep now, you see 1,000 copper straps.
Well, it was either that or no. The thing is, to fix grounds is not as hard as people think.
Yeah.
I think it was $12 for 10 of the 6-inch long solid copper with eyelets on each end straps. They were 3/8 of an inch wide, or whatever, 6 millimeters that is, or whatever it is. And otherwise, you have to go hunt down how the factory grounded it. And what you're going to find in the Jeep world is that they assembled them before they painted them and just counted on the bolts.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you guys, but most of the bolts on my Jeep are already rusty.
Yep.
So I can either go along and take everything apart, take the fenders off, clean them up, which then makes them rust again, and bolt them back on. And in Shane's case, it was easier to go along and pick nice, obviously open spots, grind a little bit of paint back with a very small, like a Dremel flap sander, and drill a hole there, and then put the like a sheet metal bolt. I like to use nuts and bolts if I can with nylocks through, but if you can't get to the other side, you can use a self-tapper kind of a thing.
Right.
But the secret there is use a washer. If you don't use a washer head bolt or screw, the strap, and then an inside tooth star washer. That's critical if you want it to last. The inside tooth star washer will dig into the metal, both of the copper strap and the steel. But once you clamp down, those little star teeth actually flatten out, allowing the outside ring that's smooth on an interior tooth star washer to actually hold the water at bay. And it can rust outside, but it won't rust inside where the current's going through.
Right.
Now, of course, after you tighten that thing down, you go ahead and then you go ahead and paint over top of it.
Right.
And we went around, and then on his YJ, the tub's all welded. So there's 2 fenders, and then we went ahead and did 2 joints, one from each fender to the grill. So that's a whopping total of 4 ground straps.
Woohoo.
Then we added a 5th ground cable between the engine block and the battery. There's one supposed to be there anyway. And then between a larger strap between the engine ground, which is on the 4 liters, there's actually a bolt for that. It's up near the right front, passenger front area where you normally bolted it. And we took that over to the frame, and we cleaned and grounded the frame. And then we took one more for good measure off of that spot and went back up to the passenger fender just to create this loop. And as I said before, it was fantastic. You put the voltometer on the negative terminal of the battery, and there wasn't anything more than 1.2 ohms anywhere in that Jeep.
Yeah.
And boy, all of a sudden, the radio worked, the clock worked, the headlights worked, the halos, it idled better. You know, the ignition system, which was the trigger box is mounted in the body, the coil pack's mounted on the firewall, the plugs are over on the engine.
Right.
You know, kind of important that the ground is continuous between all of those.
Yeah, it's definitely a notable. Forget it.
Yeah.
Words.
Anyway, again, we're going to try again. George, thanks for writing. Keep us apprised of, what this comes up to be. Mm-hmm. I really want to get the feedback so I can add it to my database of LS experience, because I'm pretty much an older engine guy. I have dabbled in plenty of LSs lately, but it's mostly been in swaps and they're already running.
Yeah.
But you know what? All engines, from the oldest to the newest, it's still
Same principle.
Same principle. Inhale, squish, bang, and
exhale.
Yep. To say it politely.
Yes. I'm over here sweating bullets going, please don't say it. Please don't say it.
Y'all know the...
Don't want to have to edit this show, please.
I wasn't. I was just going to use the
You just wanted to watch me go,
SQBB. Well, it's really not Q.
Oh, yeah.
It's S.
It's fine. Yeah.
It was done in the good redneck go.
Gotcha.
Instead of squish, it's quish.
Exactly.
So,
I think, speaking of damage, I think we've done enough damage. I know. I still can't talk, guys. I am so sorry. I'm here I'm literally closing my eyes, trying to form the words in my head so they come out of my mouth eloquently.
He don't read so good. I put scripts in front of him. It's better if he just lets the creative juices flow.
Hey, all things aside, ISPLGUD. Oh, he does. EYESPLGUD. I spell good. Oh, I'm going to get a letter from a teacher.
I'm surprised. It probably was the one that, tried to teach you and was unsuccessful, going, well, it didn't take when I did it either.
Moving on.
Folks, as we say, it's obviously time to call it quits.
My noodles cooked.
And he hadn't even been out in the sun. Time to lock up, put the Jeep in 4 low, and go out and hit the trails.
And make sure to take nothing but pictures, memories, and your trash when you leave the trail, because we want to keep these trails open for our children's and our children's children's children.
Very well.
Yes.
Very well said, sir.
I remembered something.
Yes, he did.
So where are my pants? All right. So on that note,
until 2 weeks, we'll talk to you again.
All right. Any show ideas on the trailpodcast@gmail.com. Bye, guys.
Proceeding has been provided for entertainment only. Proper service and repair procedures are vital to the safe, reliable operation of all motor vehicles, as well as personal safety of those performing those repairs. Standard safety procedures and precaution, including the use of safety goggles and proper tools and equipment, should be followed at all times to eliminate the possibility of personal injury or improper service which could damage the vehicle or compromise its safety.
What he said. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. You guys have a great day.
Bye.
This has been a Bent Axle Media production.